Hi guys, I am here at the True Story. This one is by Dinah Child Nicholson, and it is called The Fourth Child. I was lying on the sun-soaked wood floor of my childhood home, staring at the photo in a magazine. 13 children. I was a photograph of Harry and Bertha Holt of Holt International Children's Services and their large family. I was 5 years old and the youngest of the 5 children. I knew what it was like to be part of a big family, yet what held my attention most was that 8 of these children were Korean. They were adopted. At that moment, God planted a seed in my heart for adoption. My first plan was to plead with my parents to adopt a little sister or brother. I was unrelenting, yet all my 5-year-old charms were insufficient. Then the Holy Spirit whispered into my heart, "One day you will adopt your own child." I presumed he meant I would adopt if I were unable to give birth. 31 years later, however, I was happily married to a supportive and loving husband, Steve, with whom I had 3 children during our first 5 years of marriage. Steve and I were extremely busy with full-time careers in the financial services arena. In addition, we were in those throes of bringing our clients through the 1987 market crash. That year, to my astonishment, I heard God's voice whisper, "You shall have a 4th child," and I knew he meant it this time was to adopt. My exhausted husband suggested we wait 5 years. In that time, God didn't remove my passion to adopt. While volunteering for an adoption agency, we continued to pray and talk about it. We eventually named this dilemma the 4th child issue. One day I compared the reasons for buying a boat, which was my husband's dream, to adopting a 4th child. The pros and cons were almost identical, except that it would be hard to hug a boat, and one can't water ski behind a child. We entered into counseling, both of us hoping to convince my heart that adopting a 4th child would be unwise with our overpacked schedules. But after the counselors listened to us, they concluded we should adopt. God was a gentleman, and he waited for our free will decision. And now, years later, we often laugh about the moment when my husband retorted, "You didn't tell me that you wanted to adopt a child before we were married. If I had told you all my dreams and passions," I quickly replied, "you would have been afraid to marry me." In faith, we started the adoption process. We involved the entire family in the decision, and we agreed to pursue adopting from a Russian orphanage. By the end of 1996, we had passed the home study screening, completed many forms, jumped through the usual hoops, and dealt with setbacks. In January of the next year, the adoption agency showed us the medical report of a healthy 3-year-old girl named Galena. She was born on Christmas Eve, 1993, which was a night I vividly remember having a heartfelt talk with God about the 4th child calling. After a slow all-night train ride through the Ural Mountains, we arrived in Russia on March 11, 1997. It was a cold and snowy morning. We stepped off the muggy train into the cool air. When we finally reached the front door of the orphanage, we felt like Lucy in C.S. Lewis, The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, walking through the back of the wardrobe and into a new season and territory. Within an hour, our new daughter Galena Victoria Nicholson Tori was in our arms. She was tiny for a 3-year-old, at only 23 pounds and 30 inches tall. She was shy, of course, but excited. We instantly won her over by blowing soap bubbles. We learned years later that Galena was born prematurely as the 11th child of a very poor family. The Russian government had already removed 3 of the family's children to an orphanage, and the maternity ward wouldn't allow the birth mother to take Galena home. Our baby spent the first 3 months of her life in the hospital before being transferred to the orphanage. Tori is now 20 years old. She is spunky, courageous, friendly, and trusting. Steve and I remind Tori that God always had a plan for her and that His hand is still on her. We are thankful that her heart is with God and that she has conversations with Him. Raising and loving her has been one of the greatest pleasures of our lives. To quote Bertha Holt, the woman God used in my life when I was 5 years old, all children are beautiful when they're loved. You received God's gift when He adopted you as His own children. Now we call Him Abba, Father. Romans 8:15. Good night, guys.